If you want to grow one of the most stunning native wildflowers that also supports endangered pollinators like the blue Karner butterfly, then today's video is for you. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to plant wild lupine from seed. This includes the scarring and stratification process required to prep the seeds, how to plant the seeds, and how to care for the seedlings. Towards the end of this video, I'll also give some landscape design tips and talk about what to plant with wild lupine and where to plant it on your property. You'll want to stick around. This one's going to set your landscape up for beauty and biodiversity. I'm your host, Anna, and I'm here from Bright Lane Gardens. Let's get started. Wild lupine, if you didn't already know, is a stunning blue to purple native wildflower. It grows in tall spikes, and it is somewhat similar to some of the commercial lupines that we see at our local big box stores, but this one's significantly better because it definitely supports your local ecosystem, local pollinators, and the endangered blue Karner butterfly. Wild lupine loves full sun and thrives in sandy soils. It is drought tolerant once established, so it's a really great option for open prairies and meadows. This is a really crucial plant to plant in our local ecosystems, and it has that added benefit of simply being beautiful. So it's a great option and a win-win all the way around. Let's talk about how to prep your wild lupine seeds, because these little guys have a tough outer coating and they need a little wake-up call before they can successfully germinate in the spring. Like a lot of native plants, wild lupine seeds do require a process called cold stratification. This process simply mimics what naturally happens outside in the winter, which is that they go through an extended period of moist, cold temperatures that help to stratify the seed. Now, if you're planting your seeds outdoors in the fall anyway, then there's nothing additional that you need to do because Mother Nature is going to take her course, do what she needs to do with those seeds, and they will be ready to germinate in the spring. You do run the risk, of course, of having your seeds being eaten by predators such as small mammals or birds, and also usually suffering a slightly lower germination rate than if you were to tightly control those conditions indoors. Cold stratifying your seeds indoors is such an easy process. I have a whole video on this. If you're interested in it, I will link it in the description below. But essentially all we're going to do is use a refrigerator and mimic those winter conditions for this seed. Cold, moist stratification is preferred for a seed like wild lupine, and in this process you would use a coffee filter, a plastic baggie, a little bit of moisture in there, and tuck it in the fridge. However, wild lupine is one of those drought-tolerant meadow full sun plants that can also handle something that we call dry stratification. I have a video on dry stratification as well if you're interested, but to make a long story short, dry stratification is simply the process of doing that cold stratification process without the moisture, because of course there are plenty of areas in the US that do get those sub-zero winter temps, but they don't get that precipitation that we typically see here in Michigan. So there's a lot of seeds out there that can actually be stratified with just that cold period and not that moist period. Wild lupine is one of those, so take out the extra step. All I did to stratify this packet of wild lupine seeds that we're going to use today is I just stuck it in the fridge for 30 days, exactly like this. Of course, you're gonna wanna protect this guy from moisture or food residue, so tuck them in a safe corner, make sure that there's no excessive light that can touch these seeds, but other than that, you're simply going to take this entire packet of wild lupine seeds, tuck it in the refrigerator for at least 30 days, pull it out, and then we're ready to go ahead and start the next process, which is called scarification. So wild lupine seeds are technically a legume seed. There's a couple other natives that we've talked about on this channel that are also in that category. Wild indigo or false indigo is another one of those. And essentially with this seed type, we have a really tough outer coating, a really tough outer shell, and that does need to be scarified. So you might be thinking, well, out in nature, no one is scarifying this shell, but there's grit, there's sand, there's residue in the soil that's naturally abrasive and rubbing against that seed shell to soften it over those winter months. So if we're doing this false stratification period indoors, we also need to falsely scarify this seed. And all we need to do that is a simple piece of sandpaper. So here we have our wild lupine seeds. They aren't exceptionally small, so they're a lot easier to work with than some of our other native varieties. And it does make it a lot easier to also scarify these. So I just have a piece of medium grit sandpaper here, and my only goal is to scratch the surface of this seed shell so that moisture can easily penetrate inside and help the seed germinate. It's easiest to just do this with a handful of seeds at a time. So I have maybe 8 on there. You're going to want to go ahead and set them down on a larger piece of sandpaper. You'll take a smaller piece of sandpaper and lightly buff the top of the seed. Try to keep track of them because they will try to escape. Once you've finished with your first few, you'll go ahead and move on to your next batch. You want to make sure that you're not putting too much pressure down on the seed because we don't want to crack that seed prematurely. We really just want to scuff the exterior shell of the seed to make it easier for moisture to penetrate. Keep doing this until you've made it through the entire batch of seeds that you want to plant. Once you've scarified the seeds that you want to plant, we're ready to move on to our next step, which is of course planting them. When growing indoors, I like to start all of my seedlings in trays, and I usually use these little seedling cubicles. As you can see, there's 6 compartments in each of these little trays, and in the bottom of each of those compartments are holes for drainage. So any water that I put on top, the excess water can drain out down below. These little cubicles fit right into my solid plant tray here. This does not have any drainage holes in it, so this will capture any excess water that drips out. It will also help to water the roots of the plant once the seedling gets large enough. First, we're going to fill these with a lightweight seedling starting mix. We usually use Pro Mix if we're not making our own mix. Let's go ahead and fill up our containers with a base that's lightweight, like cocoa coir. Sand is always a great addition as well. And then I like to add a little bit of perlite just for some additional drainage. But you want to think lightweight, loose soil that those seedling roots can easily make their way through. Now that we have our containers filled, we're going to go ahead and make a slight indent in the top of the soil so that we can plant our seed about 1/8 of an inch under the surface of the soil. You don't want to go much deeper than this. It will be too difficult for that seedling to find its way up and out of the surface of the soil. Go ahead and make this indent in each one of your containers. I like to drop at least 2 seeds into each of my compartments. This just ensures that I'll have something sprouting in every single one of my compartments. Now that our seeds are planted, we're going to go ahead and thoroughly water those. I love to use this seedling mister. This is my go-to tool when it comes to seed starting. It just produces a really nice mist. This just ensures that we can evenly moisten the top of our soil without pushing that seed further down into the soil. So great tool if you are starting seedlings from home and have a lot of seedlings to water. After you're done watering, you want to retain that moisture that you put on the top of the soil, so you'll want to use a humidity dome or something similar. You can create a humidity dome from home using plastic wrap, but if you are a frequent seed starter like I am, it's really worth it just to invest in a handful of these plastic covers. I will link this full setup in the description below, the trays, the compartments, and the humidity dome, as well as the seedling mister, because this is the all-in-one starter kit when it comes to seedling starting. Place that humidity dome on top of your seedlings, and we now play the waiting game and wait for these guys to germinate. You are going to want to water these at least once a day, if not twice a day. The moment that you notice that soil start to dry out on the surface, you'll want to go ahead and give them a fresh mist. Make sure they're getting some airflow too. I like to pull these covers off for a couple hours during the day just to make sure I don't have any buildup of mold or mildew growth on the top of my soil. Germination for your wild lupine seeds can take anywhere from 15 to 30 days. So if you don't notice those guys germinating after a couple weeks, don't stress out. It can take up to a month for them to start to sprout through the surface of the soil. These seedlings I started a couple months ago. As you can see, I had a pretty good germination rate on this specific tray here. Overall, I have a great germination rate with wild lupine seeds, which is super exciting, especially if you're a beginner gardener. It's great to have a higher success rate just to get you engaged on some of the trickier varieties later on. So these guys are nice and happy. You can even see a couple roots popping through down below. I usually like to see a really good root growth on the bottom here. So those are just starting out, but they look nice and healthy so far. And oftentimes when it comes to wild lupine, you really don't want to upplant them into a larger container. These guys do a lot better when you stick them straight in the ground. So once they outgrow their little seedling containers here, go ahead and plan out the right place to put them in your yard so that they can live happily ever after. Speaking of planting wild lupine in your yard, let's talk about the best place to plant these guys and what to plant them with. So wild lupine likes full sun conditions, which means at least 6 hours of direct sunlight per day. If there's more than that, that's even better, and keep in mind that morning sun is usually worth more than afternoon sun. Wild lupine also likes sandy soil, loamy soil, and well-draining conditions, which means no heavy clay soils, no low spots in your yard, and no areas of accumulating water. And lastly, since they are the star of the show, wild lupine usually doesn't like much competition, so make sure that they're not surrounded by taller plants that will outcompete them for light, and make sure that they're not surrounded by any sort of fast-growing ground cover that could potentially choke them out for nutrients or moisture. Just because wild lupine is the star of the show doesn't mean that they don't pair well with others. Some common companion plants that you can plant alongside your wild lupine that will do very well include butterfly weed, which adds a nice pop of orange and is also the host plant for monarch caterpillars. Lanceleaf coreopsis, which is a really nice spring bloomer, has a long bloom time and adds a dainty yellow touch to your landscape. Purple prairie clover, which is another nitrogen fixing plant similar to lupine. It offers a nice touch of purple to your landscape and also does a good job of attracting different varieties of butterflies. And blanket flower, which is another really bright addition, often including reds, oranges, and yellows, very drought tolerant, and does a nice job of spreading without being too aggressive. When you're planting wild lupine, make sure you're keeping the wild lupine out in the open sun. But if there's a shadier edge to the landscape plot that you're working with, wild columbine would do really well there, or Ohio spiderwort. Both of these plants are a great native addition that can tolerate those partial shade conditions and won't outcompete for nutrients or moisture. When you pair together native wildflowers like this, you're creating a diverse, layered habitat for bees, butterflies, and other hummingbirds. This is an essential part of our local ecosystem, and it's a huge contributor to the health of your community ecosystem as well. That concludes our tutorial on how to start wild lupine from seed. As you can see, these are a great plant to start from seed with a very high success rate. So if you're a beginner with native plant seeds, this is a great option to start with. If you have any further questions for me on my process for growing wild lupine from seed or starting native plants from seed in general, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section below. I always love to hear from you guys. We've started a monthly newsletter from Bright Lane Gardens committed exclusively to native plants. In these newsletters, we're talking about what's in bloom that month, different landscape design tips, how to start different plants from seed, and how to clean up at the end of the year. So if this is content that you are interested in, you can have a newsletter delivered directly to your inbox every single month. You can sign up using the link in the description below, and it's also available on our website, brightlanegardens.com. That's all I have for our video today, but we have a lot more native plant videos coming up this spring. As always, thank you so much for tuning in with us today, and I sure hope to catch you next time. Bye-bye.